So, welcome back to Honorable Mention for, I think this is the 4th episode. If you're looking at the thumbnail right now, or the background of the video, you might notice that it's different. That's because it's The Walking Dead themed. So, if you're a fan of the show, you might recognize the image I'm using. If not, it is a shot of Atlanta from season 1, post the apocalypse. So we're talking about The Walking Dead, but specifically we are talking about queer coding in The Walking Dead and like my personal thoughts, opinions on what characters were likely queer coded, intentional or not, and which ones I find interesting and the relationships between them and other characters. So first, let's talk about the definition of queer coding. According to Wikipedia, queer coding is the subtextual coding of a character in media as queer. And it has a long history starting in the 1930s with the Hays Code, through, Disney villains like Ursula, who's often read like a drag queen, and it still exists today. It usually was employed in the past to circumvent the Hays Code and circumvent criticism and homophobia. And now we are lucky enough to live in a generation where we can have more characters that are openly queer instead of just subtextually queer. But queer coding is still employed today. Now, The Walking Dead aired in 2010. And since then, both the main show and the spin-offs have seen a lot of canonically openly queer characters, specifically gay and lesbian characters. However, The Walking Dead has also faced criticism from fans from time to time for killing off said characters and participating in the trope of bury your gays. So The Walking Dead has killed off, just in the main show, I don't know as much about the spin-offs, but just in the main show, The Walking Dead has killed off characters like Denise, Tara, Jesus, Eric, and it has snuffed relationships that were supposed to make it on screen from the comics like Jesus and Aaron post Eric's death. So I would argue then that The Walking Dead still suffers from homophobia, whether that be from society, from the fan base, from the AMC network, or a mixture of all three. And therefore, it makes The Walking Dead a perfect place to use queer coding when it is necessary, to keep characters on screen for longer without making them explicitly queer. But before we get into relationships and characters that I think are queer coded, I think it's also important to note that my definition of queer coding is not going to be every person's definition of queer coding. I mostly agree with Wikipedia. I mean, I do agree with their definition, and I agree with the history and obviously all of that, but I also don't think queer coding is always 100% intentional. I think queer coding can be created not just by the writers and the directors going, okay, this is exactly what we want to do, and this is exactly how we want to show this, and this is 100% intentional, but it can also be created by little moments, maybe even improvised moments by the actors, or, lines that the writers who have no knowledge of queer culture wrote and were like, oh yeah, this is like totally 100% cis het, right? But it's not, because some things can have double meanings. Some things can be interpreted a lot differently based on the person. So I'm providing my personal interpretations. And a lot of these instances, I don't think the queer coding was 100% intentional, if at all. But I don't think that makes it not queer coding. I think it's even more interesting because then you get to explore, well, what exactly created this? How did this get on screen to tick off the little switch in my head that says, oh, that's a queer character? How did that make it on there, right? And what about it, flipped the switch in my brain? What about it set off my gaydar, if you will? Basically, queerness can be in the eye of the beholder just as much as beauty can, if you've ever heard that phrase. The first character I want to talk about is Daryl Dixon. And this may shock you or it may not, but he's actually asexual coded, sort of. So in 2014, in an interview done with Robert Kirkman, who is the creator of the Walking Dead comics, as well as, I think, someone working on the show, one of the producers maybe, I don't know if he still does, but I think at one point he did. And he said that Daryl Dixon was played as somewhat asexual, in his words, on the show. But there was also a possibility early on about making his character explicitly gay. So this is interesting news, right? This is interesting to hear from someone who's a producer, creator, someone who's working behind the scenes, to hear about this intentional queer coding, maybe, because he also says that he, quote, can make it official Daryl Dixon is straight. So you may be wondering, why am I bringing Daryl up if one of the creators said, okay, so he's officially like 100% straight? Because I think that the early discussion surrounding his character's sexuality from the producers, the writers, Frank fucking Darabont, apparently, who was the director in season 1, were thinking about making him gay and also talking about his asexual coding. So yes, Daryl Dixon is straight. Yes, he's also on the asexual spectrums. To me, as someone on the ace and aro spectrums, I see Daryl as being potentially demi-romantic or demisexual, whatever combination of labels that explains his relationship with Leah in season 10, as well as a lot of the fans ship him with Connie and Carol, and some others see those relationships as queer platonic or even just platonic. But it is true, no matter what the writers say, that for the majority of the show, Daryl has been completely uninterested in any gender, anyone of any gender. So with that being a known fact about his character, it's completely valid to headcanon him as asexual and to read that as asexual or as queer coding. I think it's also worth noting that I believe a lot of people, when they hear queer coding, they think of a character who is coded to be gay or lesbian or bi or pan or in some way like same gender attracted. When you hear queer coding, you don't typically think of coding a character as aro, ace, or trans. So Daryl is sort of atypical in that way because he's queer coded-ish, but he's coded as asexual. And God, I just feel like I have to talk about this because honestly, to have Daryl Dixon, who is such a prominent character, who's been here since season 1 and has his own spin-off titled after his name and who is so unanimously loved by the fan base, to have him be ace and aro coded is like kind of a win. I mean, it's true that ace and aro people don't have a lot of representation on screen, certainly not in main characters in gigantic franchises. So I actually think it's awesome to read him that way. So the obvious elephant in the room, at least for me watching season 9, was Jesus and Aaron's relationship that never quite made it off the ground. So in the comics, Jesus and Aaron were canonically in a relationship. I personally have not read that far in the comics, so I cannot speak to the extent that they were in a relationship, whether it was as meaningful as Aaron and Eric's relationship, or if it wasn't. I don't know that. But I do know that they were in a relationship and that it was important to both of their characters. In the show, that never really happened. So what we're left with instead is this sort of queer-coded friendship that people can see and be like, yeah, so they're both gay. And they're very close. But Jesus dies before we really see more of their relationship on screen. And there's a number of reasons for that. One of them being that Tom Paine was frustrated with the direction that Jesus was going. Tom Paine was the actor for Jesus, and he was frustrated with the decisions about his character that AMC and the writers were making. And he felt like his character wasn't getting the screen time and the development that he deserved. So at one point he was like, you know what? Maybe let's just have him make this sacrifice, and this can be an introduction to the Whisperer arc. And this will be a fitting ending for his character. But I think what a lot of fans felt instead was that another gay character was getting killed off unnecessarily by way of AMC's poor choices, homophobic choices maybe. So it was kind of controversial. For me, it doesn't sit well to have Jesus die in the middle of this thing he has going on with Aaron, and with him being such a badass character and surviving longer in the comics, it really feels like an unnecessary death to me. But unnecessary deaths aside, there's still something to be said for Aaron and Jesus' relationship as it is on screen, even without the depth that it has in the comics. So we have them both neglecting duties at their respective communities, Hilltop and Alexandria, just to see each other, just to practice fighting and to talk and to vent and to theorize about what the future could be if the communities were just to come together and stop being so uptight. So in the midst of, Rick being gone for years and years, Michonne being very closed off with her community, and Hilltop being equally closed off, we have these two characters meeting and, caring about each other enough to defy the orders of their respective leaders. But while Tom Paine said that he didn't necessarily want to see Jesus and Aaron together, that it would be lazy writing to put the two gay characters together for the sake of being gay, he also said that Jesus was representation to the people who picked up on the throwaway line about boyfriends in season 7, and that he wished that Jesus' sexuality had been more upfront. And what a better way to do this than Aaron and Jesus? And back on the subject of Aaron and Jesus' queer coding, we also get a lot of post-mortem mentions of Jesus by Aaron. We get Aaron mentioning his name in the same breath as Eric's name, and we get Aaron saying that he does not regret the time that he spent breaking Alexandria's rules to spend time with Jesus. I mean, how romantic, right? But also in a show filled with so much death, those mentions after someone's death do a lot to further the relationships between characters and further the perception of how much a character was close to another character. So to have Jesus be mentioned like that by Aaron in name several times, once in the same way that Eric was mentioned, proves to me that their relationship was intended to be more than just friendship. Now, Michonne and Andrea, oh my gosh, they have so many layers to them. I 100% think they were queer-coded, probably somewhat intentionally. So Michonne and Andrea were introduced as this duo in season 3, the same season that Michonne's character was introduced. Well, to an extent, because I guess she was shown briefly in season 2, but really season 3 is where her character picks up, and her and Andrea spend 8 months out in the wilderness surviving together, taking care of each other and bonding, and then they find Woodbury, and then their conflict starts because Michonne doesn't trust the place. Immediately she knows that something is off. She's got a survivor's instinct. Her gut tells her that this place is not what it seems, to put it in her words. Whereas Andrea is like, I'm tired. I need to settle down. This place, no matter what it is underneath the surface, it's still safe for us right now, and we should give it a chance. And so they just both have sort of opposing needs that way, but it's really almost tragic because neither of them wants to leave the other. Michonne suggests running away, and Andrea is like, well, I don't want you to disappear. I want you to stay here with me. And their conflict continues because they're so desperate to stay with one another. They don't want to leave each other, at least not in the beginning. Now, Andrea and the governor end up having sort of a romantic plot, and the governor of Woodbury ends up being essentially everything Michonne suspected of him. He's a liar, he's a psychopath, he's a murderer, he's a creep, but Andrea and him still have a romantic thing for a little while. And so the language specifically that Andrea uses to refer to the governor versus Michonne is interesting and I think very queer. So the governor represents a lifestyle that is safe, comfortable, a refuge for Andrea that she hasn't been able to have well with Michonne. But Michonne represents this lifestyle of surviving on scraps, being out in the woods, not being comfortable, not really living. But there's also the people too. And the romantic component added to her relationship with the governor implies that there's this romantic choice too between them. So Andrea ends up saying that, she says at one point that, I didn't choose the governor over you. I didn't choose him over you. She didn't choose the governor over Michonne. What she really wanted was to have the lifestyle that the governor represents and to have Michonne. But she's been kind of forced to side with Woodbury in some ways. But I do think this wording is queer because it does imply that there's a romantic component to her and Michonne's relationship, which I think there is. And ultimately, Andrea and Michonne are together in the end. Michonne is the very last person to see Andrea and to speak to her right before she dies. Andrea gets bitten by a zombie and she ends up killing herself by shooting herself in the head. Pretty common for bite victims because they would rather do that than go out from a horrendous fever not being able to move. They want to have agency in their last moments. So she does this, but Michonne is with her until the very end. You know, right before she dies, there's Rick, Daryl, and Michonne in the room, and Rick and Daryl end up leaving. And the door is closed, and for a moment, there's just silence. We don't see what's going on in there, but there's just kind of silence. If there is any talking, it's muffled completely by the door, but then we hear a gunshot. So in that space between Rick and Daryl leaving and Michonne and Andrea killing herself, there's this brief moment between Andrea and Michonne where God only knows what they said to each other, but I choose to interpret it as some kind of, maybe they said an apology, or maybe they confessed love or whatever, but there was something. And that the fact that even after, you know, what Michonne sees as betrayal, even after everything that these two have been through, they still choose each other in the end. They're still together in the end for Andrea. And in this last scene, yes, Rick and Daryl are sad to see Andrea go, especially knowing her for such a long time, but Michonne is devastated. Michonne is broken down into tears. Michonne is looking at Andrea with expressions that she rarely makes, especially in this season when she's first been introduced. We don't know as much of her character, and she seems very stoic sometimes, very unfeeling, but she's really, really emotional in this scene. And Andrea is too. If you look at their expressions in that last scene, you cannot tell me with good faith that they don't feel anything for each other, because the expressions as they're saying goodbye to each other are so heartfelt, are so complex and deep and full of yearning and unsaid things and emotion that it is really hard to read that as anything but queer. honestly, as I'm recording this, I'm realizing I need a part 2 to this episode to talk about more characters. There's other characters and relationships I want to get to. I want to talk about Rick and Shane. I want to talk about Ron and Carl. I want to talk about, God, I don't even know who else. Probably more people I haven't even mentioned. Oh my gosh, Rosita and Tara, of course. But I have not yet formulated thoughts on them, really, other than just vaguely like recognizing them as queer coded relationships, characters to me. And so that's something I definitely want to do for next episode. But I think for this episode, I'm just going to end it here. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for listening, and I hope you tune in next episode for part 2 of this.